Okay, we're starting now. Again, our learning this morning should be Ili Nishmas, Nancy's mother. Tell me, Bracha, Liba, Bas, Yehuda, Leib. Nisham should have an Aliyah, and we should have Simchas. So it's a great way to give tribute. And so it's very strange. Yesterday afternoon was for my brother and I and my sister was our last Kaddish. It's 11 months already. It's hard to believe, like, where it goes. So I think weirder than like saying the last Kaddish was probably more strange to not say it at Marav last night or this morning. So, but the time goes. What are you going to do? But Baruch Hashem, we have a simcha. We have a special, very special guest. Usually she watches it on Wednesday on recording, but Eliana Margalit Klibanoff is here in person, straight from the Holy Land, and she's here for a few days, obviously for simcha. So we're really, really excited. So what I want to do is we're gonna get like super psychological, as we did kind of last time, again based on what Rabbi Klitzner taught us in the book Battling Jacob. The book is called Wrestling Jacob, which of course has to focus on this week's parsha. So I want to look at that episode, which I have always found to be extremely troubling from a literary point of view, because simply it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. So let's read that. So just to set the table, so to speak, Yaakov is running away, and then finally he gets to Lavan. 20 years, it's enough. The spotted, the speckled, and he says, okay, we got to leave. So we got to leave. But he knows that Esav is coming to meet him. So the parsha opens that Esav has 400 men, and Yaakov has to divide his troops accordingly, and he splits everyone up, et cetera, and he's preparing for this big showdown. But by the way, it's like a big showdown that turns out to be like no big deal, right? Like when you're waiting for the season finale, and then it's like not such a great crescendo of a story. Okay, so he divides up, and so that how they finally meet up again. That's a story for another time. He divides everyone up. Now go to if you're in the stone, page 174. So it's Perek Lamed Beis, and towards the bottom of the page over here at Pasuk Chaf Daled, page 174. So he gets up in the middle of the night. Really Chav Gimel. Vayakam balayla hu vayikach es shtei nashav es shtei shivchasav es achad asar yeladav ve'avar eis ma'avar yabok. And he gets up in the night and he takes his two wives, his two other wives, or whatever you want to call them, 11 children, 11 sons, ostensibly, because Dina is not considered a child, I guess. I don't know. Right? Sorry, Dina. I didn't mean that. But it must be a tough parsha for you to read, by the way. Always, yeah. See, I can read lips. And they go over Ma'avar Yabok, the ford of Jabbok. It sounds like something out of a Star Wars movie. And when he took them, he sent over his stuff, all his possessions. Okay, now we have this pasuk Chafei. Vayivaser Yaakov levado vayavek ishimo ad alos hashachar. So I want to just read through the psukim with a literal translation, and then fire away whatever strikes you as uncomfortable, or maybe more appropriately, fire away for anything that you're actually comfortable with in these verses. Okay, so Yaakov is left alone, and a man wrestles with him until the break of dawn. I'm reading the Art Scroll translation. Vayar kilo yacholo vayiga bekaf yerecho vateka kaf yerech Yaakov behei avako imo. And when he perceived that he could not overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip. So Jacob's hip socket was dislocated as he wrestled with him. Vayomer shalchin ki ilah hashachar vayomer lo ashalechacha ki im beirachtani. He said, let me go, for dawn has broken. And he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Vayomer elav ma shemecha vayomer Yaakov. He said, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Vayomer lo Yaakov. Yeyamer od shimcha ki im Yisrael ki sarisa im Elohim im anashim vatuchal. He says, no longer will be said that your name is Jacob, but Yisrael, for you have striven with the divine and with men and overcome. Vayomer Hagida Vaishal Yaakov. Yaakov asks, Vayomer Hagida na shemecha, and he says, tell me your name. Vayomer lama zeh tish'al lishmi vayivarech also Shem. He says, why did you ask my name? And he blessed him there. Vayikra Shem Yaakov Shem hamakom Peniel ki re'isi Elokim panim al panim vatinatzel nafshi. So he calls the place Peniel because I saw God face to face and he saved me. Vayizrach lo hashemesh kasher avar es Penuel v'hutzalei al yirecho. The sun rose as he passed Penuel. He was limping. Al kain lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael skid hanashe asher al kaf hayerach ad hayom hazeh ki nagav v'kaf yerach Yaakov b'gid hanashe. Therefore, the children of Israel don't eat the displaced sinew on the hip socket because he struck Jacob's hip socket on the displaced sinew. I don't know about you, but I try not to eat displaced sinew at all. So from a halachic, just from a side halachic point, in Ashkenazi world, we don't eat from the hind quarter at all. In other words, you're not allowed to eat the sinew, but we don't eat. So long as you couldn't theoretically have a T-bone steak in Ashkenazi tradition because it comes from the hind parts. Parts is parts, as Mr. Perdue used to say. So but in Sephardic halacha, so they do something what's called nikur hagid, which they have a tradition of how to extract the gid hanasha, the forbidden sinew, and therefore allows them to eat certain parts, which is one of the difference when you ask about, Sephardic shchita, Ashkenazic shchita. So in other words, if you would hold by what's called nikur, then you'll be able to do that. Okay, fine. So, anybody want to jump in? I mean, this is a wild episode. First of all, I just ask you simply, what happened? And it's like a weird place to end the paragraph. And he right, the chapter ends, and then all of a sudden he raises his eyes and, oh, by the way, here's Esau. So like, what's going on here? Now we know that. Oh, Jacob, who's he fighting with? Say it. Somebody say it.
An angel.
An angel, yes. Right? He was fighting with an angel. What does that mean exactly, Nancy?
I don't know.
Well, you said it.
Wrestling with an angel.
Have you ever fought with an angel?
No.
Yes.
I mean, yes. Every time you argue with your children, you fight with an angel.
Exactly. Or angels.
Or you remember that show, Touched by an Angel?
Yes.
Yes.
Never saw it.
Never, me neither, by the way. And even if I did, I wouldn't admit that I saw it. So, okay. So there's a lot. Now, so let's, from a literary point of view, I'll tell you this, why I've always found this to be difficult, is there are too many pronouns.
I was going to say that in Pasuk 26, it says Vayar kilo yacholo. Who?
Ah, exactly. Who are we talking about? I mean, it's like if one of your kids was writing a book report and he'd be saying, a man wrestled with him and he see that he couldn't overcome and he struck the socket of his hip.
Right.
Oh, what? You have to be a little bit more specific. Now, we can infer from the end result exactly, we could decipher a little bit what's going on here, because we see that Jacob is the one who's injured. Yaakov is injured. So it must be that he struck the socket of his hip. He, whoever this he is, let's use the angel since that's the term we're working with right now. It's the angel, so we can say the angel, let's work backwards. The angel struck the socket of his hip, but when he perceived that he could not overcome him. So it means that, so ostensibly would read, when the angel realized that he could not overcome Jacob, he struck the socket of Jacob's hip. So Jacob's hip socket was dislocated as he wrestled with Jacob.
I always thought that was the opposite, really.
Right, I'm set, but you could,
You're right.
It's very, very ambiguous, to say the very least. Then he said,
Chafzayin's also really ambiguous,
oh,
because you would think that both phrases sound like Yaakov, right? Shalcheni ki Allah hashafar. You would think it's Yaakov asking to be released, not the angel. But then, no, I'm not going to let go until you bless me. Well, the angel doesn't need a blessing. It's Yaakov who wants a blessing, I would think. That's also kind of confusing.
exactly. So who's saying let me go?
Have we confirmed that it's definitely an angel, or can we have a difference of opinion?
Oh, there's going to be lots of different opinion. I mean,
Well,
you
yeah,
have
because
the
the
bizarre
pasuk
sequence
uses
of-
the word ish, so there's so many ways you can interpret that.
Very good. Keep all these are good. This is good. This is all it's all percolating. I like that. We don't know what we're talking about, who we're talking about. Is this a man? Is this not? who said, let me go for dawn has broken? Right? Was it Elsa or Anna? Thank you.
So funny, why did they wait till dawn? I mean, if they're having this fight, like in the night it was okay, but okay, now it's morning, it's time to move on.
It's like you're setting up the whole situation. This is beautiful.
Why were they having a fight? Why were they fighting?
Right? What were they fighting about? Like, was this stamata? And by the way, how does Yaakov get left alone? And what
Right.
does this have to do with the meeting with Esav?
Yes, it is.
Why is it immediately preceding the meeting with Esav? Like what? So we have to like really think bigger than the actual few psukim here, which we'll do. And then he has this bizarre, he says, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. Now you would say, okay, fine, I'll give you, here's a bracha. But doesn't he ask, he's like, what's your name? He says, Jacob. Okay. It's not going to be said whether your name is Jacob, but Yisrael, because you have striven with the divine and with man and you have overcome. And then what's the next thing that says? And Jacob says, so it should, in other words, this is not your typical name change formula. Usually it's like, you will no longer be known as Sarai, you will only be known as Sarah. You will no longer be called Avram, you will be called Abraham. Now, by the way, so one of the things that always bothers us is that Yaakov's name is changed, but it's not really changed. Everybody else who gets a name change in the Chumash, they keep it. And the other one is gone, right? Yaakov is a little bit Yaakov, he's a little bit Yisrael, he's this, he's that, he's here, he's there. Well, we don't know what's going on.
But he's never
So-
called Yisrael, right? I mean, do you ever see it where he's referred to as Yisrael in terms of dialogue in Tanakh?
Yes.
You do?
Yes. Yes, in
Where?
Parshas Vayechi.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not consistent. In other words, if you try to apply some sort of formula or formulaic interpretation, you'd be at a loss. Because you'd be like, yeah, it's great, except for that one exception. You know, it's kind of like learning Hebrew. You know, if you learn Ivrit is like 8 million exceptions in like one rule. So anyway.
Well, the other name changes directly from God.
Yes, which we're going to go look at in a moment. So that's in chapter 35, what you're referring to, Shelley. Thank you. We'll come to that. So, but he's like, so then he says, wait a minute, so he gives him a name change. And then the next in Pasuk Lamed in 30, it says, oh, and Jacob inquired, not Yisrael inquired. And Jacob says, oh, by the way, what's your name? And he said, why do you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So he does get the blessing. So this kind of puts it back of maybe he says, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. So we can infer from the latter part that it would seem that Jacob is saying to the angel, I'm not going to let you go until you give me a bracha. They have this weird, bizarre exchange about the names, my name, your name, your name. I'm not going to tell you your name. You'll tell me my name. I'm not going to tell you your name. And he does tell him his name, and the angel still doesn't tell him his name or the ish or whatever. And he says, why do you ask my name? And he blesses him there. And then the next thing we have naming of a place. And oh, by the way, there's this thing that we can't eat. Okay. So first of all, in modern Parshanut, so one of the things that they always talk about, and if you're like, it's like the worst possible combination is to have rabbi and dad jokes, right? My daughter can attest to that. It's like really, really bad. Like, you know about like the 3 cowboys in Adon Olam? You heard of them? Afkid Ruchi, Billy Rashis, Billy Tachlis. Thank you for laughing. Like that's like the worst. I mean, that's like the worst combination. But one of the things is that when you're analyzing literary patterns or literary anomalies, one of the things we look at is what they call wordplay, puns, anagrams, even something like that. So there's a couple that are found here. So first of all, Yaakov. And again, it's just meant to draw your attention to the situation. Yaakov, where does this take place after he crosses over Nahar Yabok? Yaakov Yabok. And what happens there? Somebody struggles with him. It's he's left alone and Vaye Avek. So you have Yaakov Yabok Ye Avek. You have that wordplay taking place. Sarita, again, the whole like name, Yisrael is because Sarita. Pinuel is because Panim, which is not uncommon to have names based on what happened there. And this one is also really interesting is, and it's kind of a little bit of foreshadowing, is if you look at Pasuk Lamed, Yaakov, it says, Vayishal Yaakov Vayomer Hagida na Shemecha.
Hagid.
Gid, exactly. The Gid Hanasha is coming right up. Hagid, say it a few times. Hagid Hanasha Mecha. Gid Hanasha Mecha. Right? You hear that? Now sometimes you have to like say it out loud. You say it. So it's. But in other words, you have to look at what's going on here. Now, who is this? Let's talk about who the stranger is, right? And I'm not talking about the Billy Joel album from like 1978 or something, but one of the greats, by the way. If you've ever had the zechus, the privilege to see like Godless in action, to see Billy Joel in concert, oh, it's like, I mean, he's just a great performer. My kids last night, they went to see, the girls went to see Ishay Rebo in concert. He was phenomenal, right? It's great, worth it. He's just phenomenal, absolutely great. Anyway, I digress. So who said, Dina, what is he battling? Who is he battling?
Ish.
Ish. Okay, so Ish in Pasuk Chav Hey, he's called Ish. Yaakov, look at Pasuk then. If that's the case, look at Pasuk Lamed Aleph, Dina.
Yeah.
And he says what?
Right. Iti Elokim.
Right. So Yaakov calls Elokim. In other words, I saw, now you could say if you want, I saw the hand of God, I saw the act of God, but when he says, I saw God face to face, which by the way, we don't see that till much later, till Moshe Rabbeinu, but he's saying, I saw God to face. So he's called an Ish, he's called Elokim. And if you look actually in Pasuk Chav Tes, okay, so it says the angel, or whatever, this being says to Yaakov, your name will not be known as, no one will call you Yaakov anymore. You're going to be Yisrael. Why? Because you have battled with Elokim and Anashim.
Right.
You have battled with both. So it could be Ish, it could be Elokim, or it could be really both. So here's where we have to look at something a little bit deeper, or maybe what's really happening. Now, it is possible to say, now I know that there's the literalists and the purists that will say that every single episode in Tanakh, it literally happened, and Rivka was 3 years old, and she picked up the rock, and she did the all these, like all that kind of stuff. Okay, Chedva's coming in the room again. I don't know, is that her split personality, which is quite appropriate right now for our conversation. It could possibly be, as some will interpret, okay, now I see double chedva. The only thing better than one chedva, one Vivian, is two Vivians. It's 5 Vivians. Oh, now we lost them both. Oh, you see what I did? Oh, now she's back. Okay. So, of course, and there, by the way, the people that will say, oh yeah, God split the sea and all those things and the rock and okay, no question about it. But sometimes when we see these types of episodes, we have to analyze on a bit of a deeper level, or maybe on more of a, you might call it homiletic, you might call it psychological, but maybe what's happening is that Yaakov is actually having a battle with none other than himself. He's battling himself. So before we even get into the text or anything, what could Yaakov possibly have to battle with himself?
His guilt of stealing the bracha from Esav and knowing he's going to have this confrontation. He entered his land, and now the reality is hitting him.
Exactly. So that explains the placement of this episode. He's about to come face to face with Esav 20 years later. And by the way, just because 20 years have passed, for a lot of people, that doesn't make it any easier, doesn't make it any better. I have to tell you that I'm so super excited, by the way. So I just had like a series of phone conversations this morning with none other, with one of whom I consider one of the great Israeli personality heroines of our time, with Miriam Peretz. You know who Miriam Peretz is? So Miriam Peretz wrote a book called Miriam's Song. She most recently was in the news because she lost the bid for president of Israel against Buzzi Herzog. But Miriam Peretz is known as sort of like the gold star mom of Israel. She lost not one, but 2 sons in battle. When her older son died in Lebanon, she got her other son special permission, 3 of them, to join Golani. And her second son was killed. And she lectures all over. Anyway, the reason why I was speaking with her is because I've been able to make an arrangement that she's going to come spend Shabbos with us God willing, in May, which is just in time for Yom Yerushalayim, and she's going to talk about it, and hopefully she'll talk at school. Like really, really amazing. She's such an incredible human being. Watch her videos, outstanding. Like just really like, and she's like when you talk to her, she's like your bubby, you know. But I told her that, and I mentioned to her that I visited her son's grave when I was there in July, on July 20th, actually, it was my son's birthday. We were at her son Eli Raz's grave, and I told her, and I said, I consider that a Makom Kadosh. And she calls me back and she's crying, and she says, you know, if you would have asked him in his lifetime, you know, you think anybody would ever come, so many people would come visit your grave? He's like, I'm the regular person. Nobody would ever come visit my grave, right? So but the feelings, you know, they don't get easier over time. And she's crying. She's telling me that she's just crying. And this happened, you know, I don't know, it's 15 years ago, even more now. So, you know, it doesn't get better. So 20 years, you still have to kind of work through the fact that Yaakov, even though he's a very dominant figure in the narrative of Bereshis, he's actually, and we discussed this last Shabbos morning here in Shul, Yaakov is a bit of a pawn. His mother plays him, for better, for worse. I get it, it's part of the divine providence, blah, 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 blah. I'm not getting into the whole story of the brachos, but his mother told him what to do. He lost his own, we use the word moral autonomy. He didn't make his own choices. His mother said, don't worry, I'll take care of it. It's on me. Alai, hayu kulana, alai, kilalas chabani, etc., etc. And I always share with you, you know, the Vilna Gaon's insight into that. Alai, when she said alai, she wasn't saying it's on me. She was saying, oh, this is going to cost you. Alai, Esav, Ayin, Lavan, Yosef. You're going to have to suffer a lot because of this, alai, but, you know, we got to do it. So he doesn't, and he never really wins over the love of his father, Yitzchak. His own wives kind of toss him around. You sleep here, you sleep here, you sleep here. His kids are pulling the wool over his eyes. So he's never settled, but he realizes that he has to carry around the burden with him his whole life of his actions, of how he lost control of his self because of what he did to his brother and what he did to his parents, or one parent against the other. And he has to kind of figure that, he has to work through that. And certainly now it bubbles right back up to the surface right before he's about to meet Esau, which is why the whole imagery of happening at night is the darkest time. Soloveitchik writes about this extensively, about how, you know, when you have trouble with your feelings, it's never like in the middle of the day. It's always like in the middle of the night. You know, you wake up and it's the worst thing when you're getting older and you can't sleep through the night. Oh my God, it's awful. I'm not saying it happens to me, but it's the worst thing in the world when you can't sleep at night. And it's like there's nothing to do and you go nuts, and it's scary and it's terrifying. And that's the whole notion of night. So, and then we look at this is that, wait a minute, if let's look back at the text, who was hurt? The malach, let's just use the term malach, ish, malach, whatever it is. Okay, so let's say Yaakov is and it reads beautifully into the text if you say that Yaakov is struggling with himself, or you might call it, in psychology, they call it his alter ego, you know, his bizarro Jerry. You guys don't watch Seinfeld? Nothing? Bizarre. Oh man, it's on Netflix. You have to catch up. If Eliane were here, I would tell her they have to go turn on Netflix right now, watch all the Seinfeld. But Bizarro in Superman world, there was this sort of like alter ego Superman who was a villain, who was that was Superman, was known as Bizarro. And in Bizarro, everything was opposite. Good was evil, up was down, this type of thing. So it's kind of like a real opposite day. So in Bizarro world, Yaakov, he has to take care of this alter ego, the stealer of blessings and the usurper of positions and the tricker of brothers, etc. He has to confront this. Now, what happens is that when the alter angel or whatever confronts him, the alter ego hurts him. He's injured. Okay, and he realizes, and what does he say? He says, let me go, ki Allah hashachar, let me go, for dawn has come. Wait a minute. If Yaakov is the one who's injured, why does the angel say, let me go? It should be the other way around. It seems that the angel has the upper hand here, right? Because the angel's the one that inflicts the injury. He sees that he cannot He cannot overcome him. So he grabs his sinew or something, and then he says, let me go. Wait a minute, it should be the other way around. Yaakov should say, let me go. Okay? But what's happening is that we say, Yaakov is left alone. Look, Vayivaser Yaakov levado. Yaakov is left alone. In other words, Yaakov is left alone to face his inner demons. He has to purge his past. He has to work out his issues, so to speak. He needs to go to his rubber room and work his stuff out with his safe space, whatever you want to call it, okay? And then he has the struggle until the morning. In other words, what's the morning? Dawn represents renewal. Dawn represents improvement. Dawn represents things when things get better. Vayar ki lo yacholo, and he realizes, I can't do this. I can't extract myself from that person, that alter ego. An injury takes place. And then he says, let me go. Allah HaShachar. I need to be extracted from that person who was Yaakov, because Shachar is coming, meaning I'm going to meet Esav. I cannot possibly face Esav until I've owned up to my own iniquity, until I've owned up to my own shortcomings. And he says, Lo ashalechacha ki im beirachtani. That's why the whole notion of bracha comes into the discussion here. He says, I won't send you until I know that I deserve the bracha. In other words, I'm not going to let this alter ego go, or I'm not going to be able to get rid of this alter ego more appropriately, because of the issue of the bracha. The bracha is what's holding me back. I took the bracha. I should not have taken the bracha. In other words, if I don't get rid of this, if I don't excise this part of me right now, it will never happen. And what's it all about? It's because of the bracha. I cannot face Esav until I'm able to do this. So what happens when he stole the bracha? He assumed this sort of other identity, and he lost control, so to speak, of his own destiny. And that's what happens when he says, I want a bracha, which is why he says, bless me. And then he says, okay, ma shemecha. What is your name? He's not asking, like, how do I call him? Like, who are you really? He says to him, Vayomer love Mashemecha, and he answers Vayomer Yaakov. That's the first step to improvement. When he says, I am really Yaakov. In other words, I'm not Yaakov pretending to be Esav. I'm not Yaakov, the alter ego. When he says, you want to deal with the bracha, ask yourself this. You have to figure out what exactly you are. He's going back to the moment when he lost his sense of self, which was at the bracha episode. And now he's saying, Ki'im be'rachtani, who are you? He says, you know what? I am Yaakov. But only once he says, I am Yaakov, can he say, no, now not going to be known as Yaakov, but rather you're going to be Yisrael because you have battled through. Kisarita im Elokim ve'im arashim v'atuchal, meaning you have done the work. You have battled with yourself. You have battled with God. You have battled with all the forces that are around you, which explains, by the way, so if you look now, what Shelley mentioned earlier, the real name change, because again, you also see, it happens a lot in Bereshit that things are given a name and then they're given the same name again. We see that with Beersheba a couple of times. We see that with Yishmael. So look at 188, Perek Lamed Hey Pasuk Tes. Vayar Elokim El Yaakov Od B'Va'omi Padan Aram. So this is already a lot. He's met Esav. He's gone forward. He's gone back. We had the whole episode of Shechem. They come back. We're not going to focus on that. And he says, Hashem then appears to Yaakov, still when he's coming back from Padan Aram. Vayivarech Esav, and he blesses him. Pasuk Yud. Vayomer lo Elokim Shimcha Yaakov liyikarei Shimcha Od Yaakov ki'im Yisrael yiyeshemecha vayikra Shema Yisrael. Now that's not a most bizarre name change. I don't know what is, because normally it would say you're not going to be called Yaakov. Your name is going to be called Yisrael. But he says like this: Vayomer lo Elokim. God said to him, Shimcha Yaakov. Your name is Yaakov. Oh, and by the way, you're not going to be called Yaakov, but you're going to be called Yisrael. And then he called his name Yisrael. So what he's saying is Shimcha. If we read it this way, he's saying, Shimcha Yaakov, you have reached a point where now you yourself can face the fact that you are Yaakov. But now that you have done that, now, almost like now you deserve it. Now we can move forward, Yaakov, and now you can get the bracha, and now you can, and that's why it starts off what? Vayivarech oso. He blesses him. Why? Because now you have reached a point where you really, truly deserve the bracha. You didn't have to usurp it from anyone. You didn't have to have your mother's help from anything. You did this entirely on your own. Okay? What's even more interesting, look at what happens immediately before this exchange. After we have the whole story of Shechem and Hamor, etc., we have Hashem tells him, beginning of chapter 35, look back on page 186. Hashem says to Yaakov, listen, go back to Beit El. By the way, everything also happens in Beit El, which we started last week's parsha. Beit El, which is also, like they make a play on the words that Beit El was known as Luz, and it is Luz, it's not Luz, okay, fine. Another great rabbi joke, rabbi dad joke. What kind of people lived in Luz? Losers. Thank you. My child answers. Okay. So he says, Hashem says to Yaakov, go back to Beit El and live there, and you're going to make him Mizbeach, as you ran away from Esav. And he says, okay, we're going to get rid of all the idols and we're going to make a thing there. Okay. And God, took care of all the cities that were around them. And he calls the place, he builds a Mizbeach there, Pasuk Zion, and he calls Beis El. And then the end of this paragraph, you have this really unusual pasuk. They go back to Beit El, and that's the place where God first revealed himself to Yaakov. Vatamas devora meinekes Rivka vatikaver mitachas lebeis El tachas ha'alon vayikra Shema alon bachut. Devora, the wet nurse of Rebecca, died, and she was buried below Beit El, below the plateau, and he named it Alon bachut. Okay, so that's a really nice. Okay, I'm sorry. Who's Devora? I don't know. His wet nurse. What's going on here? Shkoyach, Devora, Nacha Levaya, Nacha Shiva, right? But look what Rashi says. Vatamas Sham Devora, Ma Inyan Devora beBeis Yaakov. What does that have to do with Devora and Beis Yaakov? Elulafi she'amra Rivka liYaakov v'shalachti v'lakachticha misham. Shocho Devora etzel padanam l'teis misham. Devora is the one that Rivka sent to make sure that he would be, etc., etc. Umeisa b'derech. And he goes on to say, and the Chazal also teach us here, that this is actually a way that the Torah describes to us the death, not of or not only of Devorah, but actually the death of Rivka. And perhaps this was Rivka's punishment, as the Ramban suggests and others, that Rivka's punishment for her role in deceiving her husband and setting up one son against the brother, one son against her other son, that her death is not recorded in the Chumash. If that's the case, so God's putting all the pieces together. He's saying, okay, go back to where I first revealed myself to you. Go back to where it all started. Go back to where you first started developing your own character, not the one that your mother forced you to be. And that's why the imagery used of Yaakov and the loss of his mother is the loss of his wet nurse. It's almost as if to say, like, Yaakov is still this child and she's constantly feeding him. He can't be his own person. She's constantly feeding him. Oh, once she dies, once she's out of the picture, what happens next? The very next page. Now God says, okay, now you can get the bracha. Now you have worked through your issues. So if we go back and we look at the struggle with the angel, Yaakov's struggle with the angel was not so much, you can read it physically like that. It wasn't so much a physical struggle with the angel. Yaakov, before he can battle or meet up with his brother, he has to face his own demons. And when he does so, which by the way explains why the meeting with Esav is rather uneventful. Okay, so look at what happens when he meets Esav, by the way. When he meets Esav, so let's go back to chapter 33, 176. He goes, he lines everybody up, he bows, Esav comes and he hugs him and he kisses him and they cry, this and that. It's like such a tearful reunion. I know the dots on top, which tell you that maybe he wasn't sincere. Okay, but you know what? You could also, the simple meaning of the text is that it was sincere. And he says, page 178 in Pasuk Hey, he looks up and he sees all this Yaakov has this tremendous family. And he says, these are the beautiful children, which God has graciously given to your servant. And he approaches each one of them, and they go, and they go. Okay. And then Pasuk Yud, Yaakov says, if you find favor, please take mincha simyadi, please take this offering, or this, what is the word here? Tribute. Okay, like a korban mincha. and then look at pasuk Yud Aleph, and it should jump off the page of you like a lightning bolt. Kachna es birchasi asher hu vaslach. Please take, now there are other words to use for gift, like mincha or matana. He says, Kachna es birchasi asher hu vaslach ki chanani alakim v'chiyesh li kol. He says, I have everything. Take the bracha. In other words, I've worked through, he's like, you know what, Esav? I never should have taken it from you. I was wrong, etc. I've worked through it. Take the bracha. It's yours. The last part we're going to add to this, and again, there's a lot to be said about this. You can really, but if the struggle with the angel is at nighttime, he's struggling with his dark inner demons. He has to battle through it. He has to come to a place where he's comfortable with himself, where then finally he has to close all those doors so that he could really be his own person and God could give him the true bracha. What does he say? That's why we have this interesting, he says, I call the place Peniel because I saw God face to face. Vayishlach lo hashemesh, which is also a very interesting phrase back in Pasuk Lamed Beis in 176:32. Now, normally we say Vayishlach hashemesh, the sun rose. What do you mean Vayishlach lo hashemesh? The sun rose for his sun rose. In other words, he could start to finally see daylight. He could finally see, a path forward as he passed Penuel and he's limping. In other words, you don't come out, anybody who goes through major therapeutic breakthroughs, whatever you want to call it, you're not going to come out, hunky-dory. You're not going to come out unscathed. You're going to be damaged. You're going to be wounded. You're going to be limping. You're going to be beat up a little bit. And he says, therefore, Lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael gid hanasher shel kaf hayerach harei hamazeh. Why? Because his yerach, the gid hanasher was afflicted. We don't eat the gid hanasher. What is gid hanasher? Look at Rashi. Gid hanasher. It's in the left-hand column, 4 lines down. Pasuk Lamed Gimel. Lama nikra shmo gid hanasher lefi shenasho mimekomo va'ala, because hu lashon kfitza. It's like a language. First interpretation, Rashi says a language of jumping. And then now he gives an interpretation, he doesn't explain it. So we have to look at that pasuk. What does that mean? So look, Rashi quotes lahalon mem aleph nan aleph. So go to 4151. 4151, and it's really, really telling on page 230. Yosef is in exile. Yosef is kicked out of his family. He ends up here, there. He's in the jail. He's out of jail. He's this or that here. He's promoted. He's demoted. He's good. He's not good. Yosef is like the yo-yo of biblical figures. Okay. He has 2 children, Menashe and Ephraim. Now we know he has Menashe first because we say Yisimcha lakin k'Ephraim k'Menashe. We switch him around like Yaakov does with the brachos. Okay, so he has it's a pasuk nun 50. Ul Yosef yulad shnei vanim. He had 2 sons before the famine came. Vayikra 51. Vayikra Yosef Hashem b'chor Menashe. He's called Menashe. Why? Ki nashani Elokim es kol amali ve'es kol beis avi. What does that mean? Look at the English. Nashani, God has made me forget all of my hardship and all of my father's household. He's first son that's born. He's finally in a good place where he can move on with his life, even though he still feels connected to his home. But he's God finally made me forget. Nashani, and that's the pasuk. This is the exact pasuk that Rashi is quoting for Gid Hanasheh. Hanasheh means to what? To forget. Yosef had to be in a psychological state where he could move forward. And part of that is he has to move on. But how do you move on? Sometimes you have to forgive and forget, or just forget. What's happening here? Gid Hanasheh, this inner struggle, this conflict that Yaakov has with himself or with his inner demons or with his past. Finally, what's the result? We don't have Gid Hanasheh. We have to forget. We have to let go. We have to work through our issues, become a new person. And that's why they say the whole concept of tshuva doesn't necessarily change what you did, but it changes who you are. So much so that when you stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in judgment, God doesn't say, well, you still broke the window. Sorry doesn't fix the window, correct. But sorry, what it does is it says the person who broke the window is not the person standing in front of you right now. That's the essence of tshuva. So therefore, this is an extremely important turning point in the persona, in the development of the character of Yaakov Avinu, where he finally comes to terms. And even though he's been running around and this and that, he's dealt with so much with Lavan and his wives and the kids, and it never gets easy for Yaakov. That's the beginning of Parshas Vayishlach. He says, Bikesh Yaakov leishav b'shalta. He just wants to sit quietly in his rocking chair. Leave me alone. I don't want to do anything. I don't have any more. God says, no, I got another plan for you. It's not in the cards for you to ever have it easy. Now, it doesn't mean that he's completely all is forgiven, but it means that he can now face Esav. He could be in a place where he can look himself in the mirror. And that's what this is, a real gut check. This battle with the angels, that's what's taking place. He's fighting with himself. So when you read it like that, it makes these bizarre psukim much more palatable. It makes it much more easy to read. So if you go back and you read them, Yaakov is left alone. Meaning he's left alone with his thoughts. It's nighttime. He has to deal with this. Before I can speak to Esav, Vayayavik, I have to struggle, whether it's a man, whether it's God, but I'm struggling with myself. And I have to do it until it gets light enough. And he realizes that I can't do it. Finally, they have to have a physical, like he grabs his he says, let me go. He says, I'm not going to let you go until Be'erachtani, until I can settle this issue with the brachas, until I can come to a point where I deserve the brachas. And he says, what's your name? And he says, it's Yaakov. I'm Yaakov. I'm not Esav. I'm Yaakov. I know who I am now. He says, now let it not be said that your name is Yaakov, but rather you're going to be called Yisrael. In other words, now that you've said that you're Yaakov, now we can give you your true calling, which is Yisrael, which we could not do until you came to terms with who you are. Because you have finally battled through. Kisarita im Elokim v'im arashim v'tuchal. Because you have finally battled through with yourself, with God, with all your issues that you have. V'tuchal, you become able. And then Yaakov says to him, well, what's your name? And he says, what are you asking my name? It's not about me, it's about you. It's not about finding who the alter ego is. No. Then Vayivarachos Hashem, now he could deserve the bracha. And then he calls the place because I have seen the light. The sun has risen for me. Vayizrach lo hashemesh. Now, again, it's not an exact reading, but when you do insert this sort of conflict and this conflict resolution into the text here, it makes it far, in my opinion, and this is, again, very modern way of looking at it, far easier to digest and to see what's going on, but also understanding the placement right before he meets Esav. His name is changed right after his mother dies, and God calls him the name. This is all part of the progression. That's why you cannot read Parshas Vayishlach alone. You have to read Toldos. You have to read Vayishlach.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, so that's what happens when we read the psukim like this. So this is a difficult parsha. There's a lot here, but you see, let's say compared to the Yaakov that we met in the beginning of Parshas Toldos versus the Yaakov who's much more seasoned now. He's married for 20 years. He has 12. He has a bunch of kids. He's got a bunch of wives. He's very wealthy. He had to deal with a difficult workplace. He had to deal with a difficult work relationship with his father-in-law. That's always how that goes. And finally, he's moving back and forth. He's going back to Beit El as God tells him. And then finally, God says, here, I'll give you the bracha. That's an unbelievable insight, I think, into understanding. But you see it how it's played out in the words, Noshani, Gid Hanosha, and Yaakov. It's like the whole play is on Yaakov, Yabok. Yaakov, you have to it's like drawing your attention. It's like you're Yaakov. You're Yaakov. You're not anybody else. You're Yaakov. You're not Esav. You're not Yaakov thinking you're Esav. You have to be Yaakov. Once you realize that you're Yaakov and you own it yourself and not because someone else told you to be that and anything else controls you, then we can change your name, Vayivarach, and you could be Yisrael. And that's why his name change to Yisrael is not, you're not anymore Yaakov. It's because you're Yaakov, now you can be Yisrael. So it's not a name change like we see with Avram and Avraham, Sarai, and so it's very, very different. It's both. He's Yaakov. He's Yisrael because he's Yaakov. That's the way we understand it. So if you ever wondered about that name change. So anyway, God willing, we'll continue next time. We get to be into Yosef and his brothers coming up and a little bit of Hanukkah. It's like lots of exciting stuff. Never a dull moment. And then before you know it, we're learning about Karbonis and Vayikra, and it's super boring. Anyway, everybody have a wonderful day. Again, Nancy, your mother's neshama should have an aliyah. We should have only simchas. I'm gonna unmute you.
Yeah, sorry that I got a phone call and I was talking while I was unmuted. I'm sorry. I have a question. Peniel and Penuel, are they different?
No, it's like a play on the words also. It's always how it happens. We see variations like that they're close enough. I guess people don't get too bothered by that, Penuel, Peniel. that
Okay.
type of thing. But it's a good, it's a very, very good observation. Before we go, just tell me one thing about your mom.
She died too soon.
And where was she from?
Newark.
Oh,
I've been from New Jersey all my life, and she has too. And so is my father, everybody. Yeah, we were all from New Jersey.
so back in the day when there was like a million shuls in Newark and things like that, right? Up until the
Well,
60s, right?
We weren't religious.
I hope to be one day, but Anyway, her nisham shev and Aliyah, thank you for sharing with us, and we should have
Thank
simple.
you.
Everybody have a great
Thank you
day.
very much. Have a good day, everyone.
And Rabbi Mazal Tov on Adina's bat mitzvah, you should only have mazel and achas.
Wait, when is that this week?
Very funny.
I gotta go. I know I have I'm ungestoppt in dress fittings and makeup and hair and this and that, and none of it is even for me. So
You
Go
just
for
have to show up.
it's something like that. Yeah. Anyway, it's good to have Simchas. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.